Hey, science fiction and fantasy author Michael Lauck, back to talk to you all again about. Well, actually, it's a little different this week. Instead of talking about something that's going on in science fiction right now, I want to talk about some retro stuff that I'm really excited to get. And basically, what it all boils down to is I was bumming around the internets and I found a copy of Men into Space by Murray Leinster, which is something I've been looking for a while for a couple of reasons. Murray Leinster was a very prolific Golden Age science fiction author. He wrote in Argosy and Weird Tales and Astounding and all that good stuff. It's a pen name for a man named William Fitzgerald Jenkins, who wrote under his own name. He wrote westerns. He wrote under another pen name. He wrote some romance stories. He was published in Black Mask, some mystery stuff, which Black Mask is like the classic mystery pulp. Very prolific writer who's just not as well known today as I think he probably should be. If okay, Murray Leinster ended up, or William Fitzgerald Jenkins ended up working in television some. He wrote a few episodes of Suspense and Lights Out, I think, the television shows, and I think he even did some sitcoms like the Loretta Young Show. But most of his science fiction never really made it to television. A couple of things. He had a story called The Wailing Asteroid, and another one that I think was called The Monster at the End of the World. They were actually turned into movies in the late 60s. The Monster at the End of the World became The Navy versus the Night Monsters. I want to say that was like right around 67, maybe. So right around when Star Trek was. I could be a little bit off on the dates. I'm not sure who made that. That was an American film. It was forgettable. I know I've seen it, but I really don't. I remember the poster better than anything else. The Wailing Asteroid, a little later on in the 60s, was turned into The Terror Knots by Amicus, the great British horror studio, the kind of rival to Hammer, which, if I'm going to watch horror, it's going to be Amicus and Hammer. Those are the guys to beat, turning out. You're great between the two of them. I think they did the Quatermass films. They did the Sheridan Le Fanu Carmilla adaptations. They did the great Christopher Lee Peter Cushing Dracula films. That was Hammer and Amicus. And the Terror Knots is one of their science fiction fantasy films from Amicus. The two. A lot of people are going to hate me for saying this. They have the two studios have a similar feel. So if you like one, you're probably going to like the other. Totally worth checking out. But other than that, those two things, there hasn't been a lot of Murray Leinster stuff turned into television. There has been a lot on radio, and I'll talk about that in a second. What makes this particular story interesting is, and I'm not sure if it's a novel or a collection of stories kind of fitted together, basically different episodes, because I've read it's both. I will find out this weekend when I read it. But what makes this interesting is this is actually an adaptation of a television show called Men into Space. It was probably, I'm sure people will argue this, but it was probably the first non-anthology serious science fiction television show in America. It was broadcast right at around 1960. It starred William Lundigan. There's a picture of him on the back as Colonel Macaulay, who he's the only character that's in it episode to episode. He is the most experienced man in the American space program, and as such, he is called upon to command the dangerous missions and to kind of step in as a problem solver when there's been accidents in space and things like that. It really tried very hard to be a realistic show. It definitely had a kid component to it because there were toys. In fact, I have an official Colonel Macaulay Minute space helmet right here that Ideal made back at the time, and this is in pretty good shape considering it's almost 60 years old. And it doesn't have it had suspension straps originally. Those are gone, but what a cool toy. I mean, check that it locks into place. When it unlocks, I don't know if you can see it, the visor comes forward before then you pull it up. Just what a cool toy for your own space adventures with the American Space Force logo. I expect to see that on Trump's Space Force here real soon. But I was very excited to get this on eBay. But mainly, Men into Space is, if it's not an adult show, it's family viewing, I would call it. I mean, it's definitely something kids could have watched, but adults could have watched too. And it wasn't a shoot 'em up, let's go rockets blazing. It was a very, I mean, there were problems like, oh no, these guys are going to run out of fuel. How are we going to save them? Or how can we move this kind of way? Like some very kind of higher end sciencey problems. There weren't aliens. It's a cool look back at what we thought was going to be happening in the 70s and 80s in space, as we're, regularly rocketing guys up to a moon base and things like that. For a long time, I thought Men into Space was lost. But, maybe 2 years ago, when Comet came to St. Louis, I was living in St. Louis at the time. Comet, the TV network that's one of those digital sub-networks, like 4.2 or whatever. It came to St. Louis, and it is a science fiction over-the-air network. And it had some stuff that I'd never seen before. It's just, it's just Stargate, it shows Andromeda, it shows movies. And it shows on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and I think in midnights too, Men into Space. And I was like, oh man, the show still exists. That's cool. So it gave me a chance to start watching it. It's a show I've really fallen in love with. And if you don't have Comet in your area, look for their website. It's comettv.com maybe. I don't know, Comet TV, look it up. Because they stream their channel live for free on the internet. So, and the weirdest thing is they cut out commercials. So if you go to their live stream and says, we'll be right back, it's because they're in a commercial. Give it a minute and see what they have on. They play Johnny Sacco. They play lots of cool stuff. And they play Men into Space. Now, Men into Space, Murray Leinster, this is so up my alley, and I'm super excited about this. And like I said, it's weird that Murray Leinster wrote this because most of his works haven't seen television. What they have seen is radio. He's got, I don't know. If you go back to the golden days of science fiction, that kind of peter out in a lot of ways, that those pulp stuff, the Argosy and the amazing stories and all that, in the early 50s as radio got big. Dimension X on NBC and later X-1 kind of crossed over to that, and they had deals with Street and Smith and maybe Grosset to play or to turn science fiction stories from some of their magazines into radio shows. So a lot of cool science fiction was done as radio shows back in the day. And you're talking Heinlein, Bradbury, Isaac Asimov. One of the early Dimension X episodes is actually one of Kurt Vonnegut's first straight science fiction stories, The Report on the Barnhouse Effect. If you've never heard these old science fiction radio shows, go to archive.org and look for Dimension X and X-1. The old radio shows are in this kind of weird legal gray area that they may or may not be public domain, but they're really easy to get. You can also buy copies of them. So check it out. They're worth checking out. They're serious, professionally acted, half an hour adaptations of these great old short stories. And when it comes to Murray Leinster, Dimension X did The Lost, A Logic Named Joe, and First Contact. A Logic Named Joe is a really interesting story because it kind of predicts the internet. The logic, a logic device is really basically a home computer in a lot of ways. Actually, kind of an Alexa in a lot of ways, where you talk to it and it hooks you into this kind of universal knowledge bank. First Contact is a very interesting story. It's about an Earth ship meeting a alien ship and how they get along. It's thought by a lot of people to be the first use of a universal translator in science fiction. And that later caused static with the Star Trek people. I don't think the family ever sued over that because the universal translator was an idea that got picked up and used by a lot of people. Probably was a simultaneous, idea because it's an obvious need to get around some problems you have in science fiction otherwise. But I do believe that the First Contact story did cause the family to eventually sue the Star Trek folks over the movie First Contact. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that happened. Later, keeping on with the radio, X-1 they rebroadcast the Logic in the First Contact. They did 2 more of his stories, If You Was a Moklin, which is a weird little story trying to kind of put you in... Yeah, you just got to listen to it. And Sam is This Is You, which honestly I don't remember. But hey, they can't all be great, right? Exploring Tomorrow, another early radio show, which there are very few episodes left as far as I remember. They did First Contact as well. So I mean, he was somebody who was often used in the 50s in these adaptations, and later 2000X, which was NPR's science fiction radio play series from maybe 25 years ago, something like that. They did a Murray Leinster story called The Mad Planet too. So I mean, when it comes to radio in that golden age of science fiction, he was there. He was one of these guys that was go-to stuff for great dramatization material. And somehow he just fell out with the TV and movies, and I think that's one of the reasons why we don't know him today. But even if you're not a fan of my stuff, even if you're just you love science fiction and it's worth checking out the Murray Leinster stuff. He had cool ideas. He really did. Operation Outer Space is a novel he wrote that literally is about the first interstellar voyage, and the only way they get funding is from a studio because they're basically turning it into a reality series. And I want to say that was written something like 60 years ago, right? And he's already kind of predicting this stuff. Like I mentioned, A Logic Named Joe has the internet. He really was a sharp man. He actually was an inventor too. I think he invented some special effects, some of the old school, kind of outmoded now, but projection effects that they used for special effects in the movies. So sharp guy, Murray Leinster. Check him out if you're of the reading bent. I am sure you can get his stuff on Kindle and things like that. But there's plenty of old paperbacks if you look around. If you have time to listen to stuff, you have some commutes or something coming up, archive.org, look for Dimension X, X-1. Check out some of the greatest science fiction of the golden age dramatized for radio. They used to call it theater of the mind, and that's perfect for this. And then finally, if you're of the TV bent, check out Comet and look for Men into Space, the actual TV show. Or dig around your movie store and see if you can find a copy of The Terranauts. I think ultimately you'll probably get more long-term pleasure out of watching Men into Space, but if you want a cheap thrill, The Terranauts is the way to go. That should give you plenty to do, but if you run out of things, bop on over to Amazon, check out some of my stories. The Black Sky Rangers Book 2 will be out soon. I also wrote The Grand Tournament, or go to swordsandrayguns.com, and there should be some free stories over there. swordsandrayguns.com. Until next time, just keep safe, everybody. Enjoy the science fiction and the fantasy. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.